All right, so in the video right before this, we kind of were introduced to this new way to measure angles. So we didn't always use degrees. Now we also have this new way called radians. And we talked about how radians are really just the ratio between the arc length and the radius of the circle. If you take that ratio, you get the angle measure that would give you that arc length in radians. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about kind of how they relate to degrees, so we just kind of get a sense as to like what radians, how much each radian is. So for example, we can pretty well picture what a 90-degree angle looks like because we're so used to talking about degrees and we know what degrees are. But radians are kind of this new thing, so we're just going to kind of get a sense of what radians actually look like in a circle and how they relate to degrees. We're actually going to start down here and talk about different ways that we might see the radian measures written. The first way is with a pi. So we might see like 2 pi or 1.5 pi or 0.3 repeating pi or 0.25 pi. That's the first way that we might see a radian measure written. We might also see that just multiplied out, so there's no more pi. Like 2 times 3.14 is 6.28. So 2 pi is the same as 6.28. If you take pi and you multiply it by 1.5, you might also see just 4.71 radians. Or if you take pi and you multiply it by 0.3 repeating, you would get 1.05 radians. Or 0.25 pi would give you 0.79 radians. So you might see it with the pi still in it, or you might see it multiplied the pi and then you just have a decimal. So there are 2 ways. You could say 2 pi radians, or you could say 6.28 radians, and those mean the same thing. You also might see it written as a fraction. So for example, over here, we could take this 1.5 and we could write it as 3 over 2 because 1.5 is the same as 3 over 2. Or you could write it not just with the fraction but as a fraction. So like combine it together, so 3 pi on top and then the 2 on the bottom. These are the same thing, but they're just 2 different ways that you might see it written. So there's a few different ways that you might notice that radians are, and so it's just important to kind of be familiar with what you might come across. So for example, over here, 0.3 repeating is the same as 1/3. So instead of 0.3 repeating pi, we might see 1/3 times pi. Or we could write that as a fraction, which is really just pi divided by 3, because multiplying by 1/3 is the same as dividing by 3. Same idea over here. Instead of 0.25 pi, you might see 1/4 pi or pi over 4. So again, these are like all of these mean the same thing. All of these are the same angle measure. All of these are, and all of these are. They're just different ways that you might see it expressed. So let's take this idea and we'll kind of come up here and we'll write where these different things fall on our circle. So in the last video, we are going to start by talking about what we discovered with relationships between radians and degrees. So we learned in the last video, this very first one I picked, this is my paper from the last video, that 1.5 pi or 3 pi over 2 was the same as 270 degrees. So let's write that down. So 270 degrees is 3/4 of the way around the circle because it's 3/4 of 360. 90 is 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and then back to the beginning. Okay, so if we start here, we know that 0 degrees is also 0 radians. So that's at the beginning. And then from there, you go all the way around. And we are at 270 degrees down here. And because of what we figured out in the last video, we know that 270 degrees is the same as 1.5 pi or maybe 3 pi over 2. So I'm going to write 1.5 pi radians. Let me zoom in on that. Okay. I'm also going to write that as a fraction. 3 pi over 2 radians. And I'm also going to multiply that out. So if I take pi and I multiply it by 1.5, I get 4.72 radians. So here's the degree measure, 270 degrees, and that's the same as 4.72 radians, or you might see it written either of these two ways. Now we also learned from our last video that 180 degrees is the same as pi. So 180 degree angle starting here going around would be halfway around the circle. So 180 degrees. Or I might see that written as pi radians. Or I might see that written as 3.14 radians. Okay? Now if, let's say, well, we also learned that all the way around the circle from what we did in the last video is 360 degrees is the same as 2 pi. So if we start here, we go all the way 360 degrees around. We could also call that 2 pi radians, or if we take 3.14 and multiply it by 2, 6.28 radians. Okay? The last one that we're going to talk about is a 90 degree angle. And if 180 degrees is pi, that means 90 degrees, halfway there, is going to be half of pi. So we're going to write 0.5 pi radians. Or we could write that as pi over 2 radians. Or if we take pi and we divide it by 2 or multiply it by 0.5, we would get 1.57 radians. Okay? So again, we have these angle measures in degrees, but we can also express them in radians. It's 2 pi all the way around the circle. It's 1 pi halfway around the circle. And then we can use those kind of milestones to figure out, those benchmarks to figure out where other angle measures might fall. So let's, I'm going to come down here. And we're going to play a little game called Which is Bigger? So for example, let's say we have 180 degrees or pi over 3. Well, 180 degrees we know is halfway around the circle, which is pi. Pi over 3 is only a third of pi, which, so if this is pi right here, pi over 3 would be back here somewhere. A third of pi, pi divided by 3, that's less than pi. Which means if this is pi over 3 back here, and this is 180 degrees over here, 180 degrees is going to be the bigger angle measure. So for this first one, we'll circle 180 degrees. The next one is 5 or 90 degrees. Well, so we know that 5 radians, well, let's look at 90 degrees. 90 degrees is up here. And that's the same as 1.57 radians, which is a lot less than 5. So 5 radians is a lot bigger than 1.57 radians, so 5 would be the bigger one. Here we have pi over 2 or 6. Well, all the way around the circle is 6.28 radians, so 6 radians would be just a little bit before that. And pi over 2 radians is all the way up here at 90 degrees. So we have 90 degrees is pi over 2. And then all the way around here is 6. So 6 is definitely the bigger angle measure. It's almost all the way around the circle. Okay, with this one, we have 4 pi over 3 or 150 degrees. Well, we know that 150 degrees is going to fall somewhere like right in here because that's 180 degrees, so 150 would be a little bit less than that. 4 pi over 3. 4 over 3 is bigger than 1. It's an improper fraction. The 4 is bigger than the 3. So this is more than 1 pi. It's like 3/3 would be 1 pi. We have 4/3. So this is 1 pi. So bigger than pi is going to be somewhere down here. So if we have 150 degrees versus more than 1 pi, more than 1 pi is going to be bigger than 150 degrees. So we'll circle that one. In this one, we have 2 pi over 3 or 270 degrees. Well, 2 pi over 3 is less than pi because it's 2/3 of a pi. So that's going to be somewhere before the 180 degree mark because 180 degrees is 1 pi. 2/3 pi is going to be less than that. And 270 degrees is more than that. So 270 is bigger. Now the last one, we have 3 pi over 4. So 3/4 pi is less than 1 pi. So that's going to be before the 180 degree mark. So somewhere over here. 4.5 is going to be more than that because 1 pi is 3.14. So 4.5 is going to be somewhere down here. So between 4.5 and less than a pi, 4.5 is going to be bigger. So hopefully that just kind of gives you a sense of how you can like kind of compare between radians and degrees. I would, if I were you, make sure to keep this circle handy. If you look in Google Classroom, you can just look at a PDF of these notes. And when you're working through the practice, keep this handy to look at it. And it kind of can give you a good comparison as to how different degrees and radians relate to each other. So I hope this video was helpful. Feel free to try the practice. You can always try it more than once to get a 100%. And that's all.